right, so this session is on Alpine.js, declare and react. And just out of curiosity, have you guys used or tried Alpine.js? All right, nobody. How about Vue.js? All right, how about React? All right, Angular? All right, so you'll be very, very at home. All right, so just a brief introduction. My name is Luis Majano. I was born in El Salvador in Central America. I was imported into the US a long time ago. I'm an official gringo for many years. I'm a computer engineer by trade. I did hardware engineering. That was my focus. Now I'm the CEO of a company called Ortus Solutions. I do a lot of books. I mostly focus my time on professional open source, building lots of tools for the CFML, Cold Fusion, and Java communities. Also, I'm a host at one of their podcasts that we host, and I live close by in Houston. Just a small shameless plug of Ortus. We do a lot of things open source, a lot of tooling, a lot of cloud services and modernization. We focused on getting legacy applications into modern times. That's why we have our Modernize or Die podcast that we do every week and every month as well. So if you're interested, come and hang out with us as well. All right, shameless plugs are off. Now we can focus on some code. All right, so you guys are familiar with Vue, with a little bit of the front-end frameworks. So what is Alpine? All right, Alpine is a very lightweight JavaScript framework. It is very close to vanilla JavaScript. It is declarative. So that is, if you guys have used Tailwind CSS, you mostly are doing things in the HTML markup. It is reactive, like Vue.js. It actually reuses some of the Vue.js declarative portions and reactive portions of Vue. It actually feels like Vue. When I started, I mostly did Vue, and I still continue to do Vue. And it feels very, very, very similar. And it's basically like jQuery for the modern web. Okay? And we'll go and discuss when to use it and when not to use it. It's very small, very lightweight. Like I said, it's only about, I think it was like 4K or 6K, the whole library. You can see on the right a very small snippet of how it works. And it's about 15 attributes that you got to learn, 6 properties, and about 3 methods, or 4 methods now. And they have a few little plugins as well and components. So if you're familiar with Tailwind, it will feel a little bit like that as well. So the actual creator is not me. It's Caleb Porcio. I'm not representing them. I just use it a lot. And this quote is I found very interesting of how he describes Alpine.js. And it's basically a silence among the noise, right? That's what caught my attention when I was looking for alternatives. And the question is why you guys want to use Alpine.js. Again, it's another tool in your arsenal. It is very small, it is very fast and focused, and that's the important thing here. It's focused, great documentation, it is extensible as well. It doesn't require any build process. This is something that you can just put into your applications that you've already built and basically code and repeat. So very easy to get started. And mostly, I needed to present some use cases of why you want to use it. So this has been great for modernizing legacy apps, okay? Or apps that have a good tenure, been written in jQuery, kind of old school, JavaScript. It is really, really great to just plug in and start giving reactivity to things without a build process, or sending them to a full framework like Vue.js or Angular or React, right? So if you're looking into that build process, into the full SPA approach or building components, then stay with that. But this is mostly if you're focusing on single page interactivity, you want to take a legacy application and spice it up, you can do it really nicely and really quickly with Alpine. It definitely feels like a modern jQuery replacement. Okay. You can also have reusability by using server-side languages. And that's really, really cool. The actual author also has a lot of PHP Laravel components, the Blade components that you can use with Alpine. We are actually creating some in TFML, and we'll be creating some for Java as well. And that way, it allows you to have these components interacting with your server-side language and also working with your front end. So it's definitely another tool in your tool belt. This is not meant to replace Vue or replace Angular or React. It's mostly if you have this specific scenario where you have a legacy application, or you have a new application that it's a small website and you don't want to go the full build process. And you can see here, this is actually a CFML component that we wrote for our CMS, which is a toggle, and it can be reused anywhere in our CMS and interacts both between the JavaScript world and the server-side world. All right, I put together a few resources for you guys to get started. Obviously, the documentation is really, really nice. It's Alpine.js.dev. You also have Alpine.day.com. They did last year. They're probably going to do this year as well. Lots of free resources and videos that you can learn with. CodePen is going to be showing you today of all the codes that I'm going to go through. VS Code has several extensions as well. The syntax and the IntelliSense, so I really recommend you guys get into it. And also for the browsers, we have several dev tools for Chrome and for Firefox as well, which are basically just like the view tools. You get the same feel as well for Alpine. And that's the end of my slides because the majority of stuff is just code. I just want to show you all kinds of examples of how to get started, how to work with it, and slowly and surely get a little bit more fancy. Now, I'm going to be using CodePen, so this way you can actually, if you have your computer or your phone or whatever, you can follow through, and you can actually have all the source code and actually fork it or do whatever you want. And also, all this is in my GitHub repository as well. So I'll let you guys take a screenshot or something if you want that. All right, so let's start with an empty page here. This is the CodePen, so you guys follow through. You can actually see everything. But the way that right now, it's actually I just added, through the settings, I just added Alpine right here as a library. And very easily, you can get started on anything. So let's start with a simple example of what is a Alpine component. And those familiar with Vue will find it similar. But in Alpine, it'll traverse the DOM and will discover any element that has an X data on it. If an element has an X dash data, so instead of in Vue, V, right, we use the X, that will basically make that component alive. And you can have as many components in the page as you want, and they can have state and everything within it, right? So to create the state, you basically start declaring, like I said, declarative inside of the markup, right? So if I want to create a reactive message right here, I would just create the message, and now I have a variable or a property that I can reuse within this component reactively, right? So I can create a span, for example, and instead of the squiggly marks that we have in in Vue.js, where you would do the actual interpolation, you use xtext, right? So with that, let's say here, hola, and you will see on the bottom, we have now hola, right? And this becomes reactive. Right? So very easily, you can start using these attributes to start connecting the properties within your DOM, right? So if we wanted to get it a little bit fancy here, and let's say we create a button, right? And we want to basically toggle just that visualization of the message, we can do that very easily, right? We can listen to events on specific buttons, just like in Vue. We can say X on, click, and then we can say, what do we want to happen, right? So here, let's say we call a method called toggle that we haven't created yet, right? So since it's declarative, we can actually go back in here and we can declare that function. So we can say toggle, right? And we can add that visualization. So let's do a visualization here. We'll do an open is gonna be true, right? And then here we're gonna create an open property called false. Actually, we'll leave it as true, right? And toggle will be this, not this dot open. All right. So that's the function that I've declared right here just to toggle. And we don't know what we're going to toggle just yet because we haven't used this open property. So we can go to the xtext and we can actually add an xShow. And we can say when the variable is open, present it, but when it's not, then hide it, right? So very easily, if you've done Vue, it feels really right at home. It felt for me at home. And you can add this on any legacy app and start creating this reactivity. Just imagine trying to do this with jQuery and trying to bind to the document elements and going through this. It gets really tedious. So very easily, you can start building state and manipulating the state right within your declarative HTML. Now, this doesn't mean that this has to be here in the HTML. You can actually have it in JavaScript, and this can actually call a function like, say, prepare data, right? And that will call a function in your JavaScript and bring back that object and prepare it for you, right? So you don't have to go all in declaring all that JavaScript or those JavaScript expressions. Now, the cool thing is that these are JavaScript expressions. So the xtext will take anything that can be actually expressed by the actual compiler. So you can see here that I can put an expression for 2 times 2. It will express it. I can use interpolation. So if I wanted to use some kind of addition here of message, say hello Atlanta, right? You can do that like that. Oops, I need to do my plus. Okay. So you can do all kinds of things with it in the terms of expressions right within your markup. Okay. Right. So very easily, we've seen xdata, xtext, xshow, and a way to click, right? Basic stuff. All right, let's move on a little bit more complex here, and let's go into nesting. So these are the things that in components, obviously, you want to nest and create hierarchies of these components, and you can do that very easily. So I'm going to break this one down and show you how easy it is to just create, for example, another div right here, which is also going to have its own xdata, right? And this way, they can be nested. So I'm going to move the code that I had written there and move it inside of here. I'm going to add the visualizations to the bottom one instead of the top one. Okay. So now, essentially, I have now 2 components declared in my HTML. The outer component, which basically just has a message property, and then the inner component, which has an open and it has that still toggle. And you can see that it still works. Everything hasn't changed except I've nested them, right? Now, however, if you want to have properties of the same name, you can override them just like if you had different functions or closures or anonymous functions in JavaScript. So if I put a message here and put it in English, right, then that will take precedence because it's the inner scope, right? So that way, it's a nice way to have a parent. The child will inherit everything from the parent, and then you can override them as you see fit. So it allows you to do that kind of parent-child relationships very easily, where everything from the parent can trickle down into the child. All right, let's keep getting more complex. Let's see a little bit more of our visibilities and start playing a little bit with more visibility here. All right, so I'm going to remove this. And I'm going to start with the simple example we had before and just start adding on top of it. So let's add another property called visible right here. And I am going to add another div. And then I'm going to add a button here. Okay. And this will be our toggle for the button. So let's click. Oops, it's on. Right, and this will be, take that visible property and just invert it. Okay. And here we're just going to do our xshow. Right, so we can say xshow will be visible. Right, so if it's visible, and then we're going to say hola from Atlanta. Right, so we have our message, and we can toggle it, and that's okay. Right. Let's add a few visualizations so you can actually see some transitions here. So let me do a background info, for example, just to see how it looks. All right. So you can see that the toggle is a little bit rough, right? And we want to make it, in jQuery, we have the slide-ins and the slide-outs and all that kind of stuff. And in Alpine, it makes it really easy for visualizations that you can actually add just called transitions. So I can actually just add the X transition right here. And that will make it a little bit smoother, see? So it has a lot of stuff for transitions as well when you're displaying things very easily. If I want the transition to go slower, I can actually concatenate it just like a function call and say the duration, I want it to be 500 milliseconds, right? So this way, you can also start adding these nice declarative transitions right within your markup for that if you needed to, right? And there's many things for the transitions in the docs. If you go to the docs, it's really well documented. There's on X transition. You can see how to do things coming in, coming out, the different delays that you do, and they all feel very declarative like this, where you're just focusing on that markup and moving things around. So let's move on a little bit in the visibility and start working with records instead of like simple toggles, right? So let's see here that we have a data and we have just an array that is empty, right? And we basically want to put something like we found some data right here, right? And it's going to show if we actually have some records, right, on it, right? We're not going to do a toggle anymore. But then we can create another div and say no records found. And do the same thing, and we're going to show this if there is no data.length, right? So just like that, basically, we can now do it dynamically looking at the array of records. So if we put some records right here, right, we can actually see that now it's going to tell you that we found some data, right? So these expressions can be evaluated according to those reactive properties and start moving things around very easily as well. Okay. So let's use another visibility markup attribute here called xif, which is different than the show. The show basically just manipulates the display property on those elements, right, setting them to none or yes. But the xif actually will remove it from the DOM, right? This is something that should not be even rendered at the DOM. So it's treating it more like a template that you want to bring in and then bring out when it's not needed, right? So we can build a little counter and that will present what we want to do here. So let's start here with, we're going to present a counter. I'm going to call xText right here. It's going to show the actual data. And then we're going to create two buttons right here, right? We're going to do a plus and a minus. And then we want to add an X on click. And we're going to be doing something here with that data, right? So here we can say data plus plus and data minus minus. And that basically we have now a counter, right? Very simple counter, right? And now we can present here our if template, right? So we start with a template tag, okay? We can't use the xif on any DOM element. It has to be a template so the actual Alpine can track it. So in our template, we can present something like, wow, that's a big number, right? And we can say xif, and we can give the expression. So our expression will be, let's say, if data is greater than 5. So if the data is now going to be greater than 5, that template is going to be added and injected into the DOM for you, right? And then it'll be removed from the DOM as well. So apart from having the visibility of being able to turn things off and on through CSS, you can also actually completely remove them from the DOM as well. Very similar as in the other, as in Vue.js or Angular and everything, okay? All right, so that's visibility. Any questions on visibility? Sure. Okay. From anywhere, you mean?
Yeah, in other words, not the declarative value, but the value
I may not understand your question. So how do you get values from within the DOM? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like
oh, like in jQuery where you wanted a DOM element or something like that?
Like the browser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I get you. So that would be the developer tools. Yeah. So the no problem. The Alpine developer tools will give you all that, right? So if I open that, it will see it. For some reason in CodePen it doesn't work. But if I take that same visibility right here, right, and let's say I open it, right, and I start right here, Alpine, you see Alpine gets activated and it'll find all the components for you. So you can go through each component and you can even turn things on and off as well. So yeah, the Alpine component, for some reason, it doesn't work in the CodePen. I couldn't figure it out, but if you open it normal in a browser and you got your Alpine tools, I really recommend that because it'll give you all that, plus any warnings or compilation issues that you have, it'll all go through here. So that's what I would recommend. So good question though. Yeah? Well, as long as there is one X data surrounding it, you will have access to it, right? there are ways to actually declare things and just give them a reference. So that could give them an ID, and then you could reference those. Like in jQuery, you manipulated the DOM through traversal, right? This will be more declarative where you would look for these things. But you can still traverse the DOM as well.
No, what I'm asking is, if data right now is 0, is there a way to set it to a number outside of your
You can through events. And we'll get through that if we have time. If not, it's all in the demo. But it allows you to manipulate pretty much anything by listening to events. So following an event pattern, you can talk to any component. Right? And that will be the same like in Vue or in Angular. All you have state, right? You can actually decide that this state is declared right here, but this you can also declare the state globally as a state manager, right? So there's two approaches as well. Good questions. All right, so let's get a little bit and see model and start seeing how it does reactivity with models, right? We have the same thing in Vue.js. So I'm going to work a little bit with messages here. So I'm going to start with the message. It's going to be empty, and I'm going to have an input right here. This will be my message. And now I'm going to use, instead of X text, I'm going to use a model to actually bind it to that reactive property. And we're going to put a span right here for that same property so you can see that it's manipulating it, of course, every time we manipulate it. And we're going to create 2 buttons, one for clearing and one for, let's say, uppercasing this guy. Okay. And we're going to do the same. Do X. Let's do our shortcut. Those familiar with Vue will feel it's the same. It's the @ So instead of doing X on, it's the same. So it's just a little shortcut. Instead of typing X on, you can just say @click. Okay. And with this one, we're just going to say the message is going to be empty. And with this one, let's call a function just to show another declarative function here, and go to upper, and it will be this dot message equals this dot message dot to uppercase, right? All right, so we have the 2 functions that we can call here in our message, right, and our input. So we can start saying here, Luis Majano. You can see that that's the reactivity that the model gives you. Just it'll bound everywhere you use it. And then if you clear it, obviously it affects everything. These are the basics of reactivity, right? You start working with one of the properties and it's affected everywhere, right? That's the great thing about these reactive frameworks, right? So with this simplicity, let's build a Markdown editor, right here. So we're getting a little bit more complex. So let's start with the text area right here. And I'm going to make it 5 columns, let's say. Okay. And we're going to bind this right here with our model to a Markdown property. Okay, so we're going to change this to Markdown. We also need the actual HTML, right? So let's do the converted data will be in the converted one, and let's create a preview that will convert it for us, right? We'll figure out what to do in here as well. Let's put this and make it a little bit nicer. Put it in a div. Not that nice, but better. Let's do a button here that will do our preview, okay? And when we click it, we basically want to convert our Markdown into HTML. Right? And then we, of course, need to present that preview, right? So let's create a little div here, right? And that's where we're going to be presenting our preview, right? So we're going to say xShow when converted has the converted elements, right? And we'll start with xText just to show you how it converts it, okay? And we'll add a few classes in here just to make it a little bit nicer so you can see it. And right now, obviously, we need to fill out the preview, right? We didn't do the preview method, right? So we can say this dot converted equals window dot marked. And where is this coming from? I added the Markdown library here called Marked. Have you ever heard of it? It's a very simplistic Markdown parser. It's very lightweight. And I can just reference it by going back into the window scope and retrieving my global library. And then I can say, hey, I want you to parse the Markdown, right? And that will parse it and put it in my converted space. So now if I actually write here, welcome to Alpine. This is a tag, and bold welcome, right? Then I can preview it, and there it is. It's converting it right there from Markdown into my text. So now you can see the text, right? But that's probably not what we want, right? We want it to look at it pretty, so we can change and introduce the other attribute, which is HTML. So if we change it to HTML, then it's gonna inject it as the inner HTML. So right now we have a simple Markdown visualizer right here, very simple, that we can add anywhere we want, right? And start looking at it. But we can probably do a little bit better, so I don't wanna be clicking this preview all the time, right? So let's remove it, right? And let's go back to my text area, and what I'm gonna do is say, whenever I'm gonna listen to an event, which is gonna be key up, whenever I do any key up inside of this text area, then let's do a live preview. So now we're doing a live preview with my Markdown being processed immediately as I'm typing, right? So really fast, you can get a lot of interactivity, really get spiced up your UI, especially in legacy apps. We've done this, and start introducing, changing things, and yanking and removing a lot of jQuery code, and just going to very simplistic things like this. You can. So what do you feel would be something, so we can see in declarative here, right? So we can actually add a debounce to the event right here. So can't remember the full declaration, but let's look on X on. And you'll see that it has several abilities to listen to many events, but it also has modifiers. So I can do prevent, I can do stop, outside, the window, debounce. So by debounce, it'll usually do 250 milliseconds, right? So just by adding debounce right here, it's 250 milliseconds. If I wanted something more, then I would concatenate it and build that declarative chain of declaration here for that specific debounce. Right? So now if we debounce it to the default, right? Right. So you can see that now it's a delayed response as I type, and then it starts previewing. Right. Cool. All right, so doing a little Markdown editor, binding to text is very simple. Binding to other elements as well is very, very simple to keep track of things. So let's do a little checkbox. I think we all need our checkboxes in our life. So we'll start with a simple one and then grow into more controls, just so you can see how you bind very easily with these controls. So we'll start with another input, and this will be a checkbox, right? And this will bind to that agree. Okay, and then we can do a label for it, for the checkbox. I guess we're gonna have to give it an ID. And we'll present the value, so you can actually see the value of that model. Okay. And just like that, we have a check by default. I can do a false here, right? And that'll be the actual checkbox, right? Very simple. You can do that right here with X model, next text, with, oh, agree. That's fine. Right, there we go. False, true. So very simple. The X model will bind to any control, right? Now the multiple selects, I think this is a use case that we all have, is how to do multiple selects for and clearing all the results if we need to. It works the same way. Let's select a selection of colors in this case. Let's start with empty, and we're gonna do a checkbox for each and bind it to the same model. So we're gonna bind it to the same model, but we're gonna give it different values, right? So let's say red, right? Do blue, right? So we got all our 3 checkboxes, and we can actually present here our colors. Okay. So as we start checking them, you see that it starts building the list very simply of all your selections that we wanted to do. I imagine doing all this in jQuery and binding all that stuff. Then, of course, we can use the reactivity to clear those selections as well. So let's do a click, and then let's reset the colors back to an array. Okay. And then we can clear them out. So very easily, you can start adding all the reactivity for the different HTML controls and start manipulating them. Right, last one will be just a select. The rest of them will be pretty much the same. Using X model, you're binding to the different HTML controls. Right? So we're going to go in here, remove that guy. And instead of an array, we're going to do a color. Let's say here, color. And we're going to do a select. And we'll bind it to that property, color, and start building our nice little options. Color, this would be red. And do green and blue. All right, so we have there our selection, and then every time we choose a color, it'll be bound, right? Simple as that. It adds that reactivity for you. If you wanted to do a pre-selected color, so let's say I want to select blue as the default color, then it will select blue as the default color, right? If you want it to be red as the default, right, that comes from a database, maybe these are plans that people can purchase, and there you go. You have that reactivity going for you. So very easily, you can start binding to all these HTML inputs and doing fancy things. All right, any questions so far on models? Yes? Okay, so similar question to the gentleman over there. So you have a few options. You can either do events to actually propagate events to manipulate and mutate data, or you can use a state tool that Alpine offers, so you can actually save state at the global level as well. So there are many ways as well. If we have time, we'll see if we can do an example. All right, so yeah. I haven't seen it mess with Vue. I've used it with both Vue and Alpine as we're transitioning some things. But yeah, I haven't seen an issue because it works on that declarations, right? There might be a few issues with other, but I haven't tried them. Yeah, I don't know why you would mix them though. I think mostly this is if you're replacing something like jQuery or vanilla JavaScript. Yeah. Yes. Good. All right, let's go a little bit deeper into HTML attribute binds. So this is just a way we've seen how to bind to the values of controls, but now let's bind to attributes of controls and data, right? So we'll start with another simple example here. Let's do a span, and let's just. Right? And what we want to do is we want to bind for the CSS classes, right? So you basically have the xbind annotation, the other new attribute now, and this will bind to the HTML attribute. Which attribute? Well, let's bind to the class. And here it's a full expression. So you can do whatever you want. You can do a ternary operator. You can call a method to retrieve a list of classes. You can actually add even more classes. So this will be an unbound HTML attribute. So let's say this is tech success. So that will give me green for the moment, right? So I can keep attaching different things that are bound and unbound, right? So let's say that I'll do an object here, and I say attach the bold class if this expression is true. So if I actually just say true, it'll bind it and it'll make it bold because that expression evaluates to true and it will apply this class, right? If this was, something like bold right here to false, and then we bind it to the property, then it's bound to the property, right? And when that property turns into true, then that becomes bold, right? So very easily you can bind to these HTML attributes, just like in other frameworks. And the cool thing is that it follows the view convention as well. So if you just do colons, right? And if you're familiar with Vue.js, it just feels right at home. It's the same syntax approach, okay? All right, so let's do a little bit more binding here, more complexity here. So let's do a button right here. And we'll just do a div to separate these guys out. Right, and we're going to create one called make it bold. And we'll do another one to make it normal. Right, so we're going to listen to an event right here. And we're just going to say is bold. Oops. It's true. Is bold. False. We're going to track that property is bold right here and default it to false, right? This will be is bold, right? And now we have the two listeners that we have here, so we can make it bold or make it normal, right? But we'll do a little bit more because I don't want them to, I want them to do like a toggle, right? So when one is on, the other one is off. So we can use the other binding, and we're going to bind it to the HTML attribute of disabled, right? So I can say here, I want to bind to the disabled, right? And this will be, if it's selected. So it's bold, right? And let's do this one here, disabled. Sorry, if it's not as bold, and if it's bold, right? So, did I do it backwards? I think I did it backwards. All right, here we go. So now I can make it bold, and now I can go back and make it bold. So you can follow that same property, and you can start creating very nice little push buttons very easily just by toggling that HTML attribute right here. Right, and we usually do that with forms, right? So when we introduce a little bit of a form and do the same with a form, right? So we'll start with, I'm going to change this to form, right? I'm going to track a name, form, do an input, name, and we're going to do a button, submit, type up, submit. And then we only want this to turn on if we have some content, right? So we'll do the same. If this is disabled, if, right? And then we do our expression here. So let's say name.length, and let's say it has to be at least 2 characters in order for us to submit this form. So right now it's disabled, and then if we get to the 2 characters, then we can turn on and use it. So same approach, we can bind on any element, monitor our state, and then react accordingly. So for the final thing here, why don't we do a little bit more, something more fun. Let's do a progress bar, right? So let's do a little progress bar right here, HTML5 progress, and we'll say that the max is going to be 100, and the value binding is going to be to the progress, right? We'll go to the progress, and the progress is 0 to start, okay? So our progress bar is going to be basically moving until we can actually reach 100, right? So we can increase the progress right here. We're going to say click, right? And we're going to say progress is now going to be plus or equals 5, right? And then as we start increasing the value, right, the progress will change, right? And let's track the progress right here, just so it appears. Oops. Right, this will be the progress. So the progress, you see that it'll start at 0, and then as we start, oh, it's submitted, right? Because we're in a form. Isn't that horrible, right? So, let's change this to a div for now. Then we'll see how to prevent these forms from not submitting. So there we go. I'm doing my progress bar and increasing all the way until I reach my 100. And since I'm a good developer, it can be bound to more than 100. Okay, we'll figure out how to bind it later to not go above 100% and be an overachiever. But really easily, like that, I can do my progress and start working and creating a reusable progress component very easily as well. All right, so how much time do we have by any chance?
8 minutes to your session's over, but there's also a 10-minute break after this. You can probably get into it if you need to.
All right. We'll get to a little bit more fancy things here.
Fine.
All right, let's continue with our progress bar here, and let's introduce another aspect of these components, which is lifecycle. So just like a constructor on all languages, we have a constructor as well for the components called init, and this is how we construct this component. So if we wanted to create a progress bar that goes on its own, well, I can create an interval here, and I'm going to set an interval. And I'm going to say on this interval, I want the progress to be +5. Let's say, let's keep it at 5, and we'll run it at an interval of 200, for example. Right? And you can start seeing that on its own, it starts increasing the actual progress. Right? I can create a little restart here, and I want to bring back the progress to 0. So once it's going to reach, then I take it back to 0. And you can amuse yourself with your little animation and going back to 0. But you can see that you can start creating a lot more complexity very easily by binding these properties and interacting with it. So let's say that if you wanted to stop, right, I can create and say this progress has reached 100, right? Then I want to clear that interval, right? So I can say clear the interval, and I want to pass in the interval, right? When I want to clear, and then just get out, right? So when it restarts and it reaches 100, then it will stop. Yes?
Does it allow to keep this functions in a separate file?
You can. Like I said, for just easy of use to show you here, I'm putting them all here. But you can easily go here and in the JavaScript panel and add your functions as you want, and then just call them. But since it's easier just for you to see everything in one shot, I put it here. But I can take all of this and just get it out. Right.
How does it bind the web.js file to this?
You would call the function, right? So if this function is, say, progress bar, right? Then it will look for a function called progress bar. So
if you have multiple components and multiple JS files,
then you have to namespace it, right? You gotta make sure how to call the function and give it a DOM. You can also add IDs. So if I wanted to do a specific unique ID for the progress bar, I can do it like this. And it will create a unique ID for me to track, right? So it gives you that magic $, jQuery remnant. But it'll give you an ID, and I'll give you a unique ID that you can reuse as well. Yes?
Is the ID how you were able to name components in Alpine? Because I haven't noticed anything that specifically gives a component a name to refer to.
No, so that will give you the identifier, but let's say I'm going to open this. I want to show you the dev tools. Let me see if I can open this in the dev tools. So I can show you that. So this one. Let's open it. Right, so if we open the tools, you will see that it's a div, right? And let's say you want to give it a name, like you just said, right? So I can go back in here, and instead of calling it a div, then I can call it something like, let's say, Louis, right? Just change the markup, and that will become, today, the Louis component. So it's by convention, just give it the name to the HTML element, and there you go, that's your name. Right? So we use that as well when we're reusing component to give it the exact name. So when we're in the tools, we can actually go to the specific names and filter through the names. And then you can bind it with like specific IDs. It does IDs automatically internally to keep track of those. But if you wanted to use that ID for some reason, you can extract it.
doesn't that make things difficult when it comes to CSS?
In which sense?
Like if you had a common component that relies on a div and you're CSS library for a div and you've named it Luis.
Yes.
It's not going to apply styling to Luis.
Correct. Yeah, I think you just have to be careful how you name them and how you want to do the CSS for it, right? Either you want to encapsulate it inside if you're doing a reusable component, or it's just leveraging the class. But yes, you can.
For deployment, do we need to build this and then?
No, there's no building. You can build it if you want, right? They'll show you how to build it. It's up to you. But like I said, this is not a replacement for Vue.js or Angular that have its place. This is something that is non-buildable if you want, just like it was before, and get something reactive quickly.
And each one is independent HTML files, or it is like again like other Angular or React, separate components.
No, the reusability that you get in the other ones will be done by the server-side language that you have. And if you're using Node as your server-side language, you would have to include these templates like that as well. So it really depends on how you want to reuse it. Like I said, the main job for it is to provide the simplicity in page. It's not a replacement for the front-end frameworks. All right, I know time is running out. So let's do another little example here, just a little REST service to present some pages from Unsplash. Right? So what I want to do is I want to search Unsplash and just present an image that I get back. That way we can be calling some type of server here. And I know I want to trap an image that I want to present. I'm going to have a query that I want to be able to use to send to the Unsplash server. I want to be able to search for a specific image, right? And that'll be it for now. Right? So here we're going to go back to our form to show you a little bit more of the form interactions. And I'm going to say when I submit this form, right, I want you to do a search for me, right? And we'll do our input. It's going to be bound to the query. And we're going to do a button right here to search. And then we'll say when you click, right, I want you to, not click because we did the form. So we'll type and submit. And we're only going to show it if we have a query, right? So query. So like that, basically, I will have my search criteria right here, and then this is supposed to search Unsplash once I have it. So let me grab here the cheat because I don't remember this whole thing. Let's go through it. So I'm gonna change the image to be from what I get from Unsplash. So I'm gonna interpolate it and say go to Unsplash and attach my query so I can get an image back and present it, right? And we don't have anywhere where we present. So let's do an image here. The source will be bound to the image. And then we're going to say just show it when there is an image value. And let's put the thumbnail over here. And oh, thank you. All right, so let's search for soccer. And again, the same form, right? Because it's submitting the form, right? So usually in JavaScript, we would go and do a prevent default, right? So it's the same thing with events. You can also do the same concatenation and just make sure that it prevents it from being submitted, right? And they have a bunch of stuff like that. And there we have our Unsplash little soccer field. Let's see what happens if we do Atlanta. Let's bring an Atlanta image. There you go. Oh. Very weird. Oh, let's do a sample. Hope I don't get a gang member in here. Oh, beautiful. There you go. Now you want to go visit to El Salvador, right?
We want you to do a cat.
Oh, cat. All right, let's do a cat. Ooh, beautiful cat too. That. Right. So very easily, you can see you can start interacting with all kinds of interactivity here. Yes?
Is the data stored within the div? Scroll down. is the X data is the scope within that div section?
This one,
Yeah.
is it replacing the image?
You get the X data to the div, right?
Yes, to the div, yes.
So is that data is only within the scope of that div section?
Yes, correct. Only within that specific div component. Yes.
If you want to take a global data,
Yeah.
is there another syntax to use or?
You use a function called Alpine.store, and that will basically bring state from the storage. Right. So you can look at it here on Alpine. There's these functions right here for where is it? Somewhere here. Yeah, store. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's like in Vue.js, you have the store components, you know. So you have a lot of stuff like that.
That's not a local store or session store, right?
It's a local store that they track for tracking state, right? State management. But you can also use the browser as well. They have plugins for that as well. So you have a few choices. Now the good thing is there's many more demos in here. I put it all on GitHub. There's more looping, more computer properties like CRUD, custom events, so you can actually bubble events from one component to the other. So lots of good stuff there if you guys want to try it. There's so much to see, but at least you're seeing like about 70-80% of what's available. It literally took me one day to go through the docs because they're very concise and start building and planning things out. So I don't know if you have any more questions. I think time's over, right? Yes.
Can you just while we're going to go back to the slide with the links for the GitHub and everything?
Oh, sure. Yes. Here we go.
Thank you.